and welcome to WASH Talks, organized as part of WSSCC's steering committee meeting. My name is Eileen Collar, and all this week we are going to be hosting WASH Talks with some experts in the field and also dedicated members of the WSSCC family. I'd first off like to welcome Carolien Van der Voorden. She is the head of the Technical Support Unit at WSSCC, and Sudha Shrestha, who is our Global Sanitation Fund Program Manager based in Nepal. So I'd like to start off with some questions with you, Carolien. So recently, WSSCC has joined forces with Plan International UK, SNV, UNICEF, WaterAid, and the World Bank. We're calling on every single stakeholder to renew their commitment to sanitation and hygiene through this call to action document. Can you explain this document to us?
So essentially what that's about is how imperative it is that we renew our commitment, that we do more for rural sanitation and hygiene programming. Essentially, these organizations have come together and looked at our own evidence and our own experience, but also the sector evidence base to share what we think is an emerging consensus on how to do effective rural sanitation and hygiene programming, and then call various stakeholders, but particularly governments and donors and development partners, to join us in this call to action and to renew our commitments and do more.
And why is it important to focus on rural sanitation?
Well, so we know from the latest Joint Monitoring Program reports that about 2 billion people in the world still lack access to sanitation, to basic sanitation. 72% of those people live in rural areas. And if you look at people that have no toilet at all, people that are still defecating in the open, we know that there are about 673 million. 91% of those people live in rural areas. So when you're looking at sanitation, the situation really is much worse in rural areas. On top of that, if you look, for example, at extreme poverty, 80% of the world's extreme poor live in rural areas too. Then if you add to that statistics about, for example, WASH in schools, we know that 1 in 3 schools lack access to WASH services and to sanitation. Most of those in rural areas too. Similarly for toilets in health institutions, etc. And then on top of all these statistics, we've also been looking at the trends, and we know that the trends are really not in favor of rural sanitation either. So we know that looking at the poorest wealth quintile, the poorest group of people in rural areas, if you look at those people across all the countries in the world, we know that 21 countries are actually off track. So actually the number of people with access to basic sanitation, the number of poor rural people with access to basic sanitation has actually decreased over the last 17 years in 21 countries. So both from the numbers and from the trends, we know we have to really make an effort to get rural sanitation back on track.
Right, thank you. And in this call to action, there are 5 key principles to successfully carry out these programs with scale, equity, and sustainability. Can you tell us about these 5 principles?
Yeah, so I think I can start by saying, for anybody working in the rural or in the sanitation sector, these are not rocket science. These are very much, like I said, I think an emergent consensus on what needs to happen. The first one is government leadership. We need political leadership, both at national and local levels, but we also need that leadership to be backed with the human and the financial resources. The second principle is about alignment, stakeholder alignment. So the sector partners coming together behind government, implementing government plans, and coordinating amongst ourselves to make sure that we work in a coherent and coordinated way. The third principle is around area-wide programming. So really looking at an entire administrative area, an entire district or whatever it may be, and in that district working not just on household sanitation, but also keeping in mind that people need to be able to access toilets when they go to school, when they go to work, when they're along the way. So really focusing both on the institutional and the household programs. The fourth principle is around inclusive solutions. Really identifying and then targeting those people that are most at risk of being left behind, and really adapting our approaches to make sure we do that effectively. And then lastly, the last principle is about evidence-based and adaptive programming or implementation. So, acknowledging that context is important, because we've learned a lot about, blueprint approaches or blanketing approaches, not really being as effective as maybe we would have hoped. So it's really very important to do context-specific programming and to do adaptive programming, built-in learning loops, etc. So those are the 5 principles. we as organizations that are subscribed to this call are obviously challenging ourselves to really start, consistently living by these principles. Obviously, we're all already trying, and we're trying to really make more partners aware that, the more of us come together around a core set of principles, the more effective we might be in improving the situation for these rural poor.
Right. Thank you, Carolien. That's a nice segue into talking with Sudha. Thank you for coming all the way from Nepal to join us during WSSCC Steering Committee Week. It's fantastic to have you on a WASH Talk. So you're the Global Sanitation Fund Program Manager for Nepal, as I mentioned, and you are in a position to carry out all the activities that we do in Nepal. Can you talk about your major highlights or achievements for the year?
Like 2019 had been a great achievement of Nepal in sanitation sector or WASH sector, we can say, because 77 districts had been ODF, declared ODF, and country had been declared ODF. So that is the great milestone of the sector of Nepal. But this does not mean that this is the end point, and it's a starting point with lots of challenges ahead.
Right. That is significant. Congratulations on the government declaring ODF, Open Defecation Free Nepal, on 30th of September. What do you think were the key factors that contributed to this success?
Like the key factors of this success is one of the roadmap that we call it Sanitation and Hygiene Master Plan, which was endorsed in 2011. And all the sector partners and the institutions that followed this master plan roadmap ahead for accelerating the sanitation coverage. And secondly, it is the multi-sectoral engagement that really geared towards the success. It is not only the WASH sector, but health, education, women development, local development, private sectors. It's the engagement of all the sectors that really geared this success ahead. And another is the leadership of the government. If government had not been in the driver's seat, it wouldn't have been possible. And the collective effort of all the sector partners. And we call it that it is the leadership of the government, strong partnership of the stakeholders, and the ownership of the community that really geared towards this success.
Well put, well put. And my final question to you is, Carolien had mentioned the call to action 5 key principles as government leadership, stakeholder alignment, area-wide programming, inclusive solutions, and evidence-based and adaptive implementation. Can you give us an example of how you were able to execute these principles?
Yeah, as Carolien had stated earlier, all those 5 principles were really engaged in this whole sanitation movement program. Like it scaled from the sanitation campaign to sanitation movement, and the engagement of all the stakeholders has been the key approach to this success. And as for example, it is the district-wide approach that we followed this whole campaign. The verification and validation process also from the very village to the VDC district level, and district to the region level, and then the region validates the whole district. And like the core principle that we really give credit to is the institutional structure that really mandated engaging all the sectors. And then the other part is the no subsidy approach that had really also geared this whole process, because it's the community ownership that really matters a lot. And in the end, it is the local-led total sanitation, that approach, which really geared towards this success. Because if it hadn't been the local leadership, then it wouldn't have been a success.
Right. Thank you, and thank you both for speaking with us today.
Thank
you. We will continue our WASH Talks tomorrow. Look at these people waiting.
No, they're all standing up.